Hello and welcome to episode 67 of the Chall podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing the first week of the Major 3 qualifiers in the Call of Duty League, which included the debut of Ghosty for Optic Texas and had some lingering effects, if you can call it that, for the Toronto Ultra. And we're also going to, later in this episode, give our predictions for the second week of the Major 3 qualifiers. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. It was an interesting weekend, I'll say. Not a ton of high-profile matches, but we had some upsets, a little bit of drama, and some, like you said, debut in there for Ghosty. So it was an interesting one. Ready to hop right in?
Yeah, let's start with the Friday, February 17th matches, which started with the Los Angeles Thieves versus the Las Vegas Legion, a match that we both thought, rather one-sided, considering the Thieves are coming off of an incredible performance at the second major of the CDL season, while Vegas did not perform very well, and they have all season been struggling in 2 of the 3 game modes. So of course, when we pick the Thieves, the Legion decided to put on arguably their best performance all season. They win 3-1. And this is also notable because this is 2Real's return to the CDL after having a pretty brief stint with the Florida Mutineers last year. Let's get your thoughts on this because I think we both thought at least that the Thieves were one of the best teams in the CDL heading into these qualifiers. And we should obviously mention that these are online qualifiers, so the performances on LAN may not completely match up with what happens online, but we still both thought that the Legion have had so many issues in hardpoint and control that even with kind of the randomness of online, that they would not be able to beat the Los Angeles Thieves. So what did you think when you're watching and you're seeing the Legion upset the Thieves to start off the week?
Yeah, I mean, look, you give me 10 chances to predict this match, given the same circumstances heading in, I'm picking the Thieves all 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
That there's uh and I was confident in the pick, and regardless of actually like pick 'em sake, like it's just the match you expect the Thieves to win. So it was a good victory for Vegas, especially with their position in the bottom of the standing. Any win is a good win for them. But especially like you mentioned, 2Real's return to the CDL, his debut with this new team, certainly didn't get off to a great start because to start this uh, first match of the series here, it was Mercado's hardpoint that the Thieves won 250 to 130, and 2Real went 12 and 23. So in my mind and a lot of people's minds, probably was thinking, oh, this is over. Uh, you know. 2Real. I saw some jokes, which I don't know if it started last year or maybe it started this year in Challenge, but it was like 2.0 real versus zero point 0.2 real. Um, so regardless of that, I thought that was a little funny, but um, yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't an ideal start. But then we know Vegas has played. It's tough to say they've played well in Search, but Search has been the mode they've been able to more consistently win than the other ones. So they get the Search win in map 2 to bounce back, then they pick up a hard fought control and a 49-point hard point to seal the upset in this one. And if you look at the scoreboard for those last 2 respawns in particular, 2Real went 32 and 21 in the control, and then he went 26 and 17 in the embassy hard point to close things out. So he played better after that first map, and it helped Vegas pull off an upset against a really tough team. So I'm still, I'm not ready to say Vegas are world beaters or anything like that after just this one win, but like we said earlier, it's an important victory for them and one that could, help them build some momentum going forward. Obviously, they had another match leader in the week here, so it doesn't really matter in that much of a sense, but at least at this point on Friday, I think things were looking really good for a strong start for Vegas in the Major 3 qualifiers.
Yeah, definitely. It seemed that maybe Two Rio's addition might be something actually beneficial to the Legion, which is not always the case. Even when we talked last week, um, we both, I think, came to the conclusion that this is a good move to make a move for the Legion because they probably had gotten to where they could have with Prolute in the lineup, or at least with that exact foursome. And to bring in Two Real is probably a good idea to just try to get something different. Of course, we didn't think this would happen, and we saw a little bit later in the week, like you mentioned, that they came back to down to earth, briefly. But yeah, a very interesting, very like impressive win for the Legion. And especially for Two Real, like this is a great first match for him. Regardless of that first map, like you have a bad first map, it happens. It's not like the rest of the Legion had a great first map either. And he played very well in the second and third, or no, in the third and fourth maps. I was going to say the second and third respawn, but that doesn't really make as much sense. So very impressed with that, but I'm also just a little skeptical because I think this is kind of the Thieves MO to kind of disappoint or not be as strong when they get online. They seem to be more of a LAN team, so I think we just have to take these online results with a grain of salt, to be honest with you.
And I think we would be having a very different conversation about the Thieves too, if they didn't get the result that they got on Sunday. But we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, of course. Next match of the week, Minnesota versus New York. A match that we both picked New York, and we were actually right. This is one of the few times I think. No, I looking through the predictions, we actually did pretty well. But I thought this was going to be a pretty tough match, and it did prove to be a game five. Because we've seen with Minnesota that they're capable of kind of being a top tier team, or a top 4 or 5 team in the league. And we've also seen where they've just disappointed and not been that great. New York has been very consistent, I think, so far this season, and they came out and they won 3-2 over the Minnesota Rocker. What are your thoughts on this match, if you have any?
Yeah, I mean, this was really the Hydra show. In
Yeah.
particular, I'm looking up. He went 15-6. It did go Game 5, Round 11, but Hydra dropped 15 in the Game 5, which was a Bagra search. I can't remember if it was back-to-back aces or maybe it was an ace followed by a 3-kill round or something. But it was late in that Game 5. Hydra kind of just took over. And that's what you expect. Heading into the season, there were rumors of him potentially being one of the highest paid players in the league, all that sort of jazz. So that's what you expect out of a guy like him at this point now. When numbers like that floating around, and they've won an event this year already, so he getting paid the big bucks. That's what you get paid to clutch up in these online qualifier matches. So it is interesting though that New York didn't win a hard point in this series. I think that's a little backwards, just in my viewpoint of both teams. I expect Minnesota to be a better search team than New York, and then New York to be a strong hardpoint team. But turns out in this series, Minnesota wins the hardpoints, and New York takes the searches. So that could be interesting, something to keep an eye on throughout the rest of these qualifiers. But this was a good win, and a little bit of revenge for New York after facing the travel issues and then losing to Minnesota first round of the Major 2 in Boston. So New York, I think I was looking at it. They have an interesting schedule for these qualifiers, and we'll go through that eventually. But it was a good win to start things off for them, because obviously, like I said, they just played these guys, and if they start 0-1, might be a little bit of a different outlook. But they were able to clutch up in that round 11 and start out 0-1 or 1-0. Sorry.
And I think this was the match where Hydra, he was drinking McDonald's Coke, and people were attributing that to his success in this series. Which, I mean, I'm not a Coke guy, so I can't confirm nor deny that. But
Oh, I can shout out F3. F3 was the one who he might not have been the originator in the COD scene, but he was the first time I heard about it. He might have tweeted or said it on stream or something about like how much he loved McDonald's Coke, and I know in particular the one closest to me, the Coke just hits different there. So obviously not for me. In comparison to these guys playing on McDonald's Coke, but I can at least attest that McDonald's Coke is the truth.
Yeah, maybe I should, if I should start playing COD again, I'll just exclusively drink McDonald's Coke to see if it helps at all. Um, let's go to this next match because this has had some roster implications with it. The Toronto Ultra versus the Boston Breach. Pretty interesting just to start the series because you had Beans's like I don't want to say debut, but his debut as a starter for Boston after Method's retirement following the second major. Beans came in the little break. So he was playing his first match as a starter for the Breach, and Toronto. I think we both thought, and I think we both probably still think one of the better teams in the game. I mean, just looking at the standings, they are one of the best teams, and
Third
in
place.
third place is pretty good, I think, in the CDL. So we weren't expecting anything to kind of change, maybe a little bit, improvement as they get used to this roster, but things changed. A 3-1 for Boston ended up resulting in a roster change for the Toronto Ultra, with Standy being benched and Hicksy, if I'm not mistaken, being brought in to replace Standy. And there was some drama about this. But first, let's just get your thoughts on the match and Standy being benched by the Ultra.
Yeah, so to start with the match, obviously I was very surprised with Boston taking this win, kind of like you said. Um, this wasn't Beans' debut, but it was his first online match as a starter for this new Boston team following Method's retirement. And, Toronto was your pick to win Major 2. They were looking like one of the best teams in the game over the last couple months. They just had that one off Saturday where they had that 0-6 map count at the Major. And technically that means heading into this match, they're on a 2-match losing streak, and they lose this one to Boston. They go on a 3-match losing streak. But I certainly wasn't expecting there to be a roster change from this team, especially considering just how much potential I felt this squad had as the 4-man roster that they had. And obviously, looking at the standings, when I see they're in third place and they make a change like this, it's kind of just eye-opening to me. So I was definitely surprised by the result of the match. In particular, I was really surprised that last match, Greenberg Hotel Hardpoint, was 250 to 242, and Boston wins it with Beans going 12-28. By far the worst performance in the map, and his 12 kills. The next closest is Standy with 21. So like it was a really not a great showing out of Beans, but it didn't matter because they got the win in the end. So that was a little weird in my eyes. Even in the first hard point, Beans went 19-29, which was the worst performance in that map as well. So might be some concerns there just based on this match. Obviously, they had a another match after this, I believe. Yeah, they played the very next match after this. So, but just after this initial match, I wasn't really sure what was going on with Beans. There was some banner between Scrappy and Beans on Twitter after too, so that's always fun. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter. We've said it many times in this podcast. Stats don't matter if you get the win. So Beans did enough to help the squad get a dub, and it was a big upset in my eyes.
Yeah, definitely a big upset. I mean, like we said, Toronto, one of the better teams in the league, one of the higher teams in the standings. Boston has kind of struggled with a little bit of the consistency so far this season, and we didn't know obviously how this was going to go with Beans in the lineup replacing Methods. Pretty sudden change because of the retirement. But for the Toronto, this roster change, pretty much coming out of nowhere, like no one I think could have predicted this. I don't think Standy predicted this from the things that he said afterward. So when I guess so he got benched and he tweeted backstab so many times I started walking backwards. That's a nice line. And he went on the flank and kind of gave a little bit of the rundown on how this benching occurred. He said that he kind of took ownership of the game or of the match that they lost to Boston, felt like he played pretty poorly individually, and told the players that I think he said he texted the group chat because they all stormed out. They were disappointed, angry about losing to Boston, and he texted the group chat saying something along the lines of like, "Hey, my bad today. I'll be better or whatever," and didn't get a response from any of the teammates. And then some time passed, and this is just from what he said, that he got a text message or a message of some kind from the coaches, and then he pretty much knew at that point that he was going to be benched. And then he texted the players after he had been benched, kind of wishing them good luck. And I don't think they texted him back. So, I mean, that's obviously just one man's word against. I mean, I don't think that any of the other players on Toronto have said anything. But from that point of view, that is a really bad look for the Toronto players, just like not being transparent nor like kind of respectful that this is like, kind of a crappy situation for everyone involved, and especially Standy because he's being benched. This is not something that he expected, nor many people in the community expected. And I don't think it, really says a lot, or I think it says a lot about the team dynamics that they didn't even have like a conversation, didn't feel like they could have a conversation, I guess. What are your thoughts on this? Obviously, we should say it's Standy's word, and I'm not saying that's a definitive thing, but from his point of view, it does look pretty poorly for Toronto. So what do you think?
I just think that the entire situation is pretty mind blowing to me. I
Mhm.
was extremely surprised that Standy was benched in the first place. Like I said, literally Toronto's in third place. Um, and yeah, they were technically on a three-match losing streak when uh, they may make this move, but I don't think that's the reason. And
Yeah.
obviously, if there's backstab, alleged backstabbing and stuff, there's probably more behind the scenes stuff. So it's not just one match. But yeah, I mean, third place team making a move like this with a very young roster that I think still has a ton of potential.
Mhm.
Um, and especially with Standy. I mean, we already saw what Standy did in his rookie year in the CDL. He was the guy who was brought in mid-season for Minnesota and completely reinvigorated that team, and eventually led to the Minnesota Miracle against Toronto at the end of the Cold War year. So I think very highly of Standy as a player. Obviously it's only been a couple years in the CDL now, but I think he just has a lot of potential. I feel like I'm being repetitive with that, but I do think, solid submachine gun players aren't the easiest thing to find. And I think he has a lot of, I'm pretty sure he's only 21 still, so he's still young. Um, and yeah, like I was saying, stats don't mean everything, but in that Toronto match in particular, he had the lowest KD on Toronto with a .86. But if you look at the season overall, he has a 1.05 overall KD on the year. I think that included that match, and even if it didn't include that match, then it maybe drops to a 1.04. Um, Regardless, he was having a good year, which is indicative because Toronto has seen success this year. Although they haven't won tournaments and they had that one bad day at Major Two, they were still a strong team in a lot of these qualifiers. And not even just you, but multiple people in the community had them as a potential winner for Major Two. Um, so I was really surprised. It's nothing against Hixie. I honestly just don't know much about him other than the fact I'm pretty sure he subbed in for one match in the Vanguard year for Toronto. But um, I think at best this is like a lateral move for Toronto. I don't know unless it's like a vibe thing or behind the scenes thing. I'm not
Yeah.
really sure how much of an upgrade Hixie could possibly be over Standy. But it is worth mentioning, Hixie has that European connection with the people behind the Toronto coaching staff and Kleenex and Insight, and then I'm pretty sure he played with Scrappy on the Toronto Academy team last year. So, in that regard, the move makes a little bit more sense, and Standy coming into the team could be seen as like that outlier, or um, potentially in some people's eyes, maybe Standy was the person. If this team was to make a change, he was just like the piece that had to be moved or something like that. So I don't know. I just think I think highly of Standy. I'm not sure if he's gonna compete in challengers, or maybe he'll just sit on the bench until he gets potentially another CDL offer. I don't really know, but I'm hoping the best for him, and I look forward to seeing him compete again, because I do think highly of him, and I look forward to watching him play again.
Yeah, Hixie he was on the Ultra Academy NA roster with Scrappy, Assault, and Vickle. So I mean, obviously there is a connection there, and he's been a part of the Ultra organization at least for a little bit. As for the reason for this, I have to think that it's a vibe thing. It's more of a personality or like a chemistry decision, because it doesn't make any sense, based on like what we're seeing, to make this move so quickly, right? I looked at the stats, so you're correct that they are technically on a 3-match losing streak, because they lost their final 2 matches of the major, and then they lost their first, or they were at this point, I should say.
Yeah, at this point.
So they lost their match against Atlanta and against LAT. They were swept both times, and they were eliminated from the major at that point. It should be noted, Atlanta won the major, LAT got second at the major. So the 2 best teams at the tournament eliminated them. Of course, it sweeps. You say like what went wrong, but like it happens. It happens to literally every team. So I wouldn't read too much into that. It's a disappointing result for sure, because I think they had the potential to win that tournament, but they didn't, and I guess that is a big loss for them. And then they lost this online match to Boston 3-1. And looking at the stats in these 3 matches, I will preface this by saying that this is a very small sample size, and it's like not indicative of like the actual like skill or anything. Standy had the worst KD in hardpoint, worst KD in search, and the worst KD in control. So if you want to go by stats, I don't know. I don't think that's what they were looking at when they made this decision. I'm almost positive that it wasn't a purely stats thing, because that would be absolutely ridiculous, and they would be getting roasted by pretty much any player or team when you factor in all of the roles that are involved in Call of Duty. But if you're looking at the stats, it makes the most sense, I guess, for Standy to be replaced. But again, that's 3 matches, 2 matches being against who I think are the best teams in Call of Duty at the moment. Atlanta, I think, is by far and away the best team, and LAT is, if you don't think they're second, they're third. Like I don't think that there's much of a skill gap between Atlanta and LAT. So losing those 2 matches, and then you lose to Boston online in your first match of the online qualifiers, I just think that's frankly just kind of a ridiculous move to make. And I really hope that Standy, if he doesn't get an opportunity to play again with Toronto this season, I hope he finds his way to another roster that will give him a starting position, so he can prove that he is talented, that he's worthy of being a starter in the CDL, because this is the worst thing. And I put him in the same boat as someone like Illy. Like those 2 players are way too talented to be benched, like on the bench for a team, when there are other players that are just not nearly as talented or skilled as them that are currently starters. So I hope that we get to see Standy starting sometime again in the CDL, whether that be for Toronto or another team. But yeah, I don't really get the move. I'm really with you on that one. Just kind of a baffling decision, unless there was some behind the scenes stuff that we just won't know. But I mean,
That's it.
at least from Standy's point of view, it wasn't that, but he could be, not being completely forthcoming if it was a like a a personality or vibe thing.
And even if it was a stats based move for whatever reason, I don't think of, I could be completely off here, but I'm pretty sure I saw the stats, some brief stats from challengers. I just don't think of Hixie as like a superstar SMG who's going to come in and drop a 1.2, right? Like, that's if Standy is not playing well statistically, then potentially trying to bring in a heavy slaying sub could be the answer, because you have Kleenex, who's going to be that guy just flying around the map, and there's going to be tons of maps where he just goes 30 and 30, 35 and 35, just a ton of engagements and going one for one with kills and deaths. So having another sub to pair alongside him who, can either match his pace or be that guy behind Kleenex entering to get his trade, that's going to be where some of those numbers come in. So I don't know. I think it will definitely be interesting to see how Hixie performs for this team going forward. And kind of like you said, I will be excited to see if Standy gets another opportunity, and I will definitely be excited to see his first matchup against this team if that happens this year, and I hope it does.
One last thing before we move on, and I just remember this as you were talking, but I'm pretty sure in the off season it was a thing that was being rumored that Hixie and Scrappy were going to get called up to be paired with Cammy and Kleenex, if I'm not mistaken, or not Cammy, Kleenex and Insight.
I do remember that now,
So
yeah.
I believe that was the rumor that they were going to bring up two from Ultra Academy NA, and they were going to pair them with two current Ultra starters. I wonder if that played a factor at all, that they had been thinking, rumored, I guess, to be thinking about Hixie in the off season. It's just something that to wonder about, like the Ultra, like management or the Ultra roster building at this point, because this is the first time that Marky B hasn't been a part of that process, which is definitely definitely something to think about, because Marky B has been kind of like the head guy, at least for the roster building, for 3-4 years, and then he went to LAG and became their guy, and now they don't have that. So they went with Standy in the offseason, a very surprising move, at least from my point of view, to bring him in the first place, because I figured that Minnesota were going to try to do their best to keep him, or I just didn't expect Toronto to go for him. But I do wonder if that had anything to do with it, that Hixie had been rumored to be joining Ultra in the offseason, and then he ended up being another, a substitute for them to start the season. So something to keep thinking about. We will have another Toronto match to talk about with Hixie, starting a little bit later in the show. Let's kind of pick up the pace, I guess, because we're already about half an hour in, and we've only gotten through 3 matches. So Boston versus London, nothing too surprising here, although I did pick London. I didn't feel very confident, if I remember correctly, because I felt that, one, Boston, I did not know what they would look like with Beans, and London, I just never feel confident in London. So I ended up going with the Royal Ravens, and that turned out to be a bad decision for me. Boston win this 3-2. Any thoughts on this match?
I just think it's important. We were talking just now about the Beans performance in the Toronto match, especially struggling in that game 4 hard point. He ends this series with a 1.32 KD, 74 kills, most in the series. So obviously there's, in both of our eyes and many people's eyes, a big difference between playing against Toronto and playing against London. But nevertheless, this was it was good to see Beans have a solid performance, especially after not having the best map for against Toronto, even though it was a win. So 2-0 week for Boston.
Next match of the week, Atlanta versus Florida. Not a surprising result. Florida had made a bunch of roster changes heading in, and Atlanta, best team in the game, coming off of their Major 2 victory. Any thoughts on the Florida, debut, I guess, because this is a very different roster than what we saw Florida with so far in the season. A lot of roster changes during this mini break between Major 2 and the Major 3 qualifiers. Any kind of overarching thoughts, first impressions of this new Florida roster?
Nah, I mean, I think this is, even if FaZe weren't the reigning major champions, In my eyes, they're still the best team. So this is literally the hardest matchup any team could have
Yeah,
as their
definitely.
first match for a new squad. So very hard to have any takeaways from this Florida team. I think I still like the concept of the changes they made. It's just hard for them. I'm not expecting them to come out and pull off an upset in this matchup here. So FaZe took care of business, and I still want to see more out of Florida. So I don't really have much in particular. I just feel like it's unfair to judge Florida based on this match.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bad match to kind of get a gauge on where they are as a team. Um, let's start with, or let's go to Optic versus LA, or yeah, is this LAG?
Yeah.
Optic, yeah, Optic versus LAG. I lost my place there. So Optic starting with Ghosty for the first time, his CDL debut, his pro debut, which is really wild. We talked about it last week, how he pretty much like the first guy in over a decade to play for Optic without having been a pro before as a starter. So a lot of, I don't know if expectations are the word because we use that word a lot with Optic, but it was definitely a pretty highly anticipated match just to see how he would play with this new roster. And overall, I think like he performed pretty well, all things considered, but he definitely wasn't the Optic player that people were talking about after this match. That would be Hook. And in particular, that game 5, 6-1 S&D win, he ends up going 14-1 in the map, just like really, really carries Optic to the win. Pretty dominant victory for them as a team, but a really dominant showing for him as an individual. Your thoughts on Hook's incredible game 5 and Optic's first win with Ghosty on the roster?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure Nameless tweeted it. Yeah, Nameless like beat me to it because I was thinking it and I saw the tweet, so I didn't tweet it after. But that was literally, in my mind, I'm thinking of flashbacks to young Hook the Nuke back in AW, just absolutely dominating kids. Like that was prime Hook showing up when Optic needed him, and obviously first online qualifier match. So not the biggest stakes and certainly not the most important match Hook has ever played in, but it was a good win. Um, Obviously, starting 1-0 is better than going 0-1. So, wasn't the toughest team for them, but LAG pushed it to a game 5, or actually they won 2 and 3. So Optic were able to rebound from going down 2-1 to force a game 5 and then just dominate in that one. So that was good to see. I think in particular too, if I remember, the game 1 hotel hardpoint was just pure dominance, 250 to 127.
Your boy Joe Deceives not having a good time on that
Yeah, did
map.
not have a good time in that map. And then in the second hard point, Shotzi went 34 and 26. I remember he was absolutely piecing in that one, and it was kind of overlooked just because of Hook's performance in
Mhm.
map 5. But I will say, too, just in general, Exceed had a really good series, too. He dropped 22 kills uh, in that game 1 where LAG just got dominated. That was the most in the entire kill, or in the entire lobby. Hook had 20, which was the most on Optic, and this next closest on his team, Marcides and Assault, both had 12. So Exceed played really well there. He had 12 kills to lead map 2. He had 21 in the control, which is decent, and then he had 32 again in game 4, which was just behind Shotzi's 34. So Exceed played really well in a losing effort. But like you said, it was really the Hook the Nuke show in game 5. That was the big talking point of this one, and it is worth just mentioning real quick too that Ghosty had a .93 KD in his first game, 65 and 70. I believe he had. I don't know. Do we have the Breaking Point? Doesn't have the hill stats. I'm pretty sure he had over 2 minutes in the hill in map 1. Don't know his hill time for game 4, but that's a stat that could be overlooked if he's the one sitting in the hill, allowing Shotzi, Hook, and Dashy to just slay out around him. Then going a little negative isn't going to be the end of the world for this team. So Solid start for Optic. Obviously, like you were saying earlier, Optic fans would have much preferred a 3-0 with a 250 to 0 hardpoint, 6-0 search, and 3-0 control. But things aren't always going to go that way. So looking forward to seeing more out of this squad still in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. I I think that's a great gig to, if you can get it, to be the OBJ player for Optic. Have these little demons running around you, killing everybody on the map, and you're just sitting in the hill like, yeah, this is gonna work. I mean, it's kind of similar to
I
what
mean, and
TP was doing in Complexity. Like, he had three of the best players of all time just around him, and TP's great. And I'm not saying that Ghosty's not great, but just the idea of having like some of the most talented players of all time around you does really help when you need to be like the OBJ player. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I mean, we're talking about Ghosty doing this in his first match when he's
Yeah,
coming off dropping a
yeah,
1.3 in Challenger. So it's not like he's definitely, or it's definitely not like he's incapable of slaying. It's just based on the initial stats, when a team is winning by 125 points in a hard point, it's hard to judge numbers just based off that alone. He did say. Let me pull up the recap real quick, because obviously they did the post match interview with Ghosty in his first match. Um, and his quote in that one, Puckett just asked him how it felt to get that first win. He was like, I'm not happy that it went to map 5, obviously, but it's good to get a gritty series in. For the first one, I kind of got slammed maps 2 and 5, but Kyler is literally the greatest. So that's just building off that initial reaction because it's right after the game 5. But Ghosty, he went 5 and 8 in map 2 and 1 and 4 in map 5, which again can't really
yeah,
judge much of the numbers from map 5 because when a guy's dropping 14, that's only so many kills you can get. But
yeah. When he's
uh,
averaging 2 kills per round, that you can't really do a whole lot.
yep. So I think getting the W was important for this new Optic roster. I still just want to see more out of them, and looking forward to that over the next couple of weeks before we get to their own home major.
Yeah, that's a little bit of what I was gonna say. That Optic, they're going up against LAG, who I don't think is a very strong team in the league, and especially with this roster, they're kind of still trying to figure out if it's gonna work and everything. So it's like, and it's online, so it's really hard to kind of gauge where Optic will be. I mean, they, like, even before, they were a very good team. Like, we didn't really get to see them like have a long stretch with any single roster. Like, the longest stretch was literally that first set of qualifying matches in the first major of the season, when they had Scump in the lineup. But even then, that was only 2 weeks of qualifying matches versus like the 3 weeks we've been getting since then. So we really haven't had a lot of time to see what a solid roster for Optic can look like. Hopefully for them and all of their fans, they will actually get that this time around. Maybe be able to stick around for the entire season with this new lineup. But it's not entirely impressive because it's LAG. I'm not, no disrespect to LAG. I am a merch buyer. I've supported this team more than like 99% of people on Earth, but this team's just not very good, so it's kind of hard to see where Optic is at. It's almost like the exact opposite of what we were talking about with Atlanta and Florida. Like, Florida's going up against Atlanta. Like, how much can they prove? Like, unless they really play them close, then like we can't really see what they're made of. So it's going to be more interesting to see what Optic can do over these next 2 weeks, and of course when we get to Arlington and we get to the third major of the season. Last match of Saturday, Seattle versus Minnesota. I am so tired of the Seattle Surge. This team is really annoying. Um, I don't even remember how many losses they had before this, or like what their overall season record was before this match. But I did the logical thing and I picked Minnesota to win this match because even at their worst, Minnesota has not been like, we can't win search and destroy. They haven't been that bad. Whereas Seattle had lost pretty much every search for like the last 2 months. Turns out Seattle decided to win search on Saturday, and they won this series 3-0. you picked Seattle because you're a genius apparently. So tell me why you picked Seattle and what you saw that made you so happy with the Surge beating the Rocker.
I told you, man, and we've talked about it numerous times with this Seattle roster in particular. Just over the last 2 years, it's just that seesaw. They go back and forth, and they were on the down part last major two, and now it's their time to bounce back. And I don't think I can't remember if they went 0-5 and major two qualifiers. I know it wasn't good because they started in losers and then they lost the one match to Boston and got eliminated first round, but didn't play in major two, so now they're just gonna go 5-0 and in major three qualifiers. It only makes sense. But jokes aside, yeah, I mean that's the most important thing is Seattle was actually able to win a search and destroy, and it's crazy what happens when you're not consistently losing arguably the most important mode in a best of five series. It is worth mentioning the first hard point on Hydro. Hard point was very close to 52-40, but then the search was 6-1 and the control was 3-0. So it is worth mentioning too that this means the Rocker went 0-3 in search this week because they had those two S&D losses to New York as well. So that's a little surprising for me, kind of like we were talking during that New York Minnesota series. So I will have my eyes on Minnesota's search heading into this next week of qualifiers to see what they're able to do because, like I said earlier, I just expect Minnesota to be a strong search team. But yeah, this is an important victory for Seattle to try and get back on the right foot, and I will definitely be interested to see how the squad responds in their upcoming matches if they're able to build off this.
To illustrate how stupid Seattle's season has been, first stage, so these are the online qualifying matches. They went 1-3. Then they go to the major, the first major of the season. They win 5 of their 7 matches, so 5-2 at the major. Online stage 2, 1-4. Major 2, 0-1, get knocked out by Boston. And then
So that
they
means
win.
they go 4-1.
Yeah. This is ridiculous. I'm so like, I mean, I guess like you look at who they've beaten and like they beat London a few times, which not impressive at all. But then they've beaten LAT, they've beaten New York, and they've beaten Atlanta. They've beaten New York again, and now they've beaten Minnesota. Minnesota's not as impressive as those other wins, but I don't know how to predict this team. Like if anyone is listening and you bet on the Seattle Surge, you are a maniac because there's no idea. Like they could just wake up and be like one of the best teams in the game. They got second at the first major and then got first rounded at the second. Like there's no way to predict how this team does because we also saw this was how it happened last year, right? I think they got like top 12 at one of the majors and then they ended up winning a major. So this all over the place. Definitely if if I could just not pick their matches, I would. But I'm a man of my word. I will pick their matches and probably get it wrong, which is really annoying. Sunday, February 19th. Thankfully, we didn't have any more Seattle matches to make me angry. New York versus Florida started off. No surprise there. New York wins 3-0. Any thoughts on that?
Same thing as the Atlanta match, man. I mean, literally, Florida has to play the major one champs, or they play major two champs followed by major one champs. Not surprising. They weren't able to win a map. I guess that's noteworthy, but still, I need to see more, just bigger sample size from the squad before I can properly judge them. I feel.
Well, good news is it'll probably get easier from here because you don't have to play Atlanta or New
You would
York.
think, but it actually doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, it might get like 1% easier, but it's still like, it's going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah.
Vegas versus Toronto. We've kind of like teased this earlier in the show. This was the first match for Hixie as a starter for the Ultra, replacing Standy in the lineup. And this was also the second match of Vegas's week after having that really big win to start the weekend, beating LAT. And of course, Vegas, they have a very high, and then they ended up losing this to Toronto. What'd you think of Hixie's debut, and what'd you think of Vegas kind of coming back down to earth after their win over LAT?
This was a banger search in this one too. I don't know the exact number, but there were multiple ninja diffuses in this one, and it went down to around 11. So again, we've talked about Vegas' search. That is the only thing they were able to win here, but outside of that, Toronto was pretty much in control for this series. Um, I think looking at the stats overall for the series, it kind of illustrates what we were talking about with that the roster change. You have Insight going 57 and 45 for a 1.27. So it's a good KD, but very low interactions, especially compared to Scrappy going 81 and 59. It's a 1.37, so it's a higher KD than Insight, but he literally has more deaths than Insight has kills. I mean, even 81 kills compared to 57 plus 45 would be 102, so I guess it's not that close, but you know what I mean. It's just
Mhm.
Insight's playing a little bit slower than Scrappy, so Scrappy has more interactions there. And then Kleenex 72 and 71. That's like I was saying earlier. He's going to be that sub guy going in, high interactions, trying to set the pace, entry into objectives, all that. Hixie has the lowest KD with 64 and 75. So I think that kind of breaks down the roles a little bit on this squad. It's just Hixie is kind of going to be that role player in my mind, and if Insight and Scrappy are able to slay behind Kleenex, then it really doesn't matter that much. But
Mhm.
obviously, still one series here. Gonna have to see more of the squad before we can properly evaluate them, I'm seeming to say about a lot of these teams right now. But I mean, again, it's online COD, and at most it's 2 matches of online COD for some of these rosters. And in cases like this, with a mid-weekend change, it's literally 1 match. So tough to get a good baseline of some of these squads, but I do think that that breakdown of just Toronto's stats for this series kind of illustrates just my mindset of what I expect from this squad. Um, and if we get to that point where maybe not even necessarily Hixie, but if Hixie's going to be that role guy, maybe Hixie's the guy who's at the 1.0 and Kleenex steps it up to, even just be that superstar that you know what I think about Kleenex. Like,
Mhm.
if he's even able to kick things up a notch more than he already is, like Toronto could definitely be scary and in that contender mindset that people had heading into Major Two.
Yeah. Last match of the week, Atlanta versus LAT, something that we were both looking forward to. I think it was the most anticipated match of the weekend, the rematch between the two grand finalists for the last major. And I don't want to say that I told you so, but I told you so. LAT, I still think Atlanta, until it's on land, until I'm proven otherwise, I think Atlanta is the best team in the game. But when it comes to these online matches, I think there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to LAT and FaZe. Even though LAT I don't think is a particularly strong online team, I just think when they go head to head, it's a little bit different. And LAT did end up pulling this one out 3-1. And it wasn't, that close. At least in the hard points, they weren't like super tight. But FaZe did end up winning the search. Any thoughts on this as we wrap up our recap from the week?
I mean, I was expecting Thieves to be 1-1 this week
Hmm.
because I was expecting them to beat Vegas and lose to Atlanta. So, um, same record, but just very different outcome for both
Yeah.
of their matches in my mind. So, it is worth mentioning, like you said, Atlanta was able to take the search. They still are incredibly strong in search and destroy. By far the best search and destroy team in the game right now. Um, there's just that control came down to a game 5, but the Thieves kind of, a 250 172 map 1 win, 250 195. Not necessarily blowouts, but not 10-point matches either. So, um, interesting that it was online, and obviously LA playing from LA, Atlanta playing from Atlanta. Um, could be those factors and in there. Who knows what's going on? But um, regardless, I think the Thieves winning this just makes their matchups even more interesting going forward. Because if Atlanta just came in and kind of steamrolled them, like
Yeah.
maybe not as many people would have cared. But Thieves getting immediate revenge, even though it's an online match, it just makes the storyline, and I'm not going to call it a rivalry necessarily, but it just makes this matchup stronger for any more potential rematches throughout this year.
Yeah, I think it's a rivalry in the sense that like these are two of the best teams. I look at it like if you're looking at the NFL, something like Kansas City and Cincinnati, or Cincinnati and Buffalo, Kansas City and Buffalo, like
Sure.
these teams that are just going to be at the top or near the top all the time, and they're going to meet each other just because they are both very good teams. But yeah, it's not the same as like whatever like Envy versus Optic would be. It was more, and I guess that was kind of like a championship rivalry as well. But there was also just a lot of contention there between like players and teams and whatnot. So
We
it's
do have that here, though.
yeah, that's true. There was a little bit of banter, to put it lightly, on Twitter. A little bit of emojis being used that could be uh, um a little accusatory, to bring out a big word, coming from Slasher. But I mean, I looked at Twitter and I saw like what was happening, and I was like, I love this scene so much, like, because you don't usually, after an NFL game, you don't go on Twitter and you see like these players accusing each other of drug use or anything. So only in COD.
I just gotta say that you know our listeners most likely don't follow the LCS, but to
Mhm.
put it, very simply, there was a trash talking incident in the LCS in their match. I think it was either Thursday or Friday because they play on Thursday and Fridays now, where a rookie player on Team Liquid typed in all chat in League of Legends. Obviously, on the computer, they have a chat that you can communicate with the other
Pretty
team
much game
during the
chat for
game,
COD.
but you not audio. It's
Yeah, yeah.
messaging. And he allegedly said like that Cloud9 was worse than um or that Cloud9's Academy team was better, or Liquid's Academy team was better than Cloud9. I don't remember exactly, but it was an insult towards Cloud9 about being worse than a Academy team, either Cloud9's or Liquid's. Regardless, there was in-game trash talk. Then post-match, the one of the Cloud9 veterans did not shake hands with the player who typed that in the game, and League Twitter was set ablaze over there not being a post game handshake. And all I'm thinking in the back of my head, that sounds like a regular day at COD.
Yeah. Like we literally had like a former world champion, like not explicitly but implicitly saying like you use Adderall. Like that was the implication that many people got from this. And then we had all of the drama about Draza's girlfriend like blocking people on his account, like,
That was funny.
and then we have Draza and Simp going back and forth about stair glitching. Like, I mean, honestly, Draza is very good for this COD community because he's had a few incidents where it's just like he brings the entertainment aspect of this scene that we've kind of missed with some of the retirements that have happened over the years, Aches being one of the biggest, that like we just never got it fully replaced. But Draza is doing his best to keep up his part. So I very much appreciate him for that. Yeah. But again, I mean, I guess we could just mention, because we're almost an hour, but I think we should mention about the like the snaking stuff that Jem brought it up in our group chat, and a lot of people were talking about it just you know as the games are happening. That's pretty much like a weekly occurrence that there's like a snaking discussion on Twitter. I think everyone knows what snaking is, but it's, for the people that don't know what snaking is, it's just literally hitting your crouch button over and over again, and like, or, you can go prone, and it's pretty much, it makes it impossible to kill you because you are essentially just like up, or up, down, up, down, like behind a counter. And it's ridiculous. It's something that's happened, I don't know, for like a decade now in COD, like, or close to it. But the biggest offender, or the people that or the person that people accuse the most of doing this, is Celium. You can do it too, phase up. He's pretty good at it, I'll say. And it's been a big thing. I guess what's your take on snaking and like its place in COD and like all of the discussions that have been, happening around this issue for the COD community?
Yeah, I could talk about this for a while, but I'm not going to do that. The TLDR version, at least in this match in particular, the drama was apparently around stair glitching, which I didn't know was like as big of a, because like they were talking about it on Twitter, like it being G8 and stuff, and I guess like maybe I've seen it in game, but I didn't realize it was like as big of a thing as it like actually needing to be G8. But
Mhm.
apparently, like if you're on one of the lower steps of a staircase, you can still see like as if you're on the top and the other team can't see you or something to that effect. There was a screenshot where Slasher was saying like, no, he's not doing that. He's crouched at the staircase or whatever. But
Yeah.
um, regardless of that, anything like that is, it's not, a gun or an attachment you can put on a gun. It's incredibly difficult to police, especially snaking, as you mentioned. Um, in my experience, snaking was really bad in the original MW3. That was my first taste of it way back in the day, and then I feel like for a while in some of these games, like there was blur glitching in Black Ops 2, but like if I think about Black Ops 2, I don't really think about snaking. I don't really think about it
Uh-huh.
in Ghost that much. Obviously, the jetpack era, it wasn't as much of a thing. It's really just the slide canceling era in the more recent years where it became super prevalent. And I say not in the jetpack area, but IW snaking was really bad. There was
Yeah.
that whole
That's
saga with like Splice, and it was even Celium
mhm.
snaking on one of those pedestals on a, I don't even remember. I think the map was called Scorch. I don't even remember
Yeah.
that game
That's
enough,
the one
but
I remember,
um,
like where I was like, "Oh, this is
yeah.
probably a really big issue."
Regardless of all that, just the act of snaking is so hard to police in
Hmm.
GA, where it's gotten to this point now where it's literally all the pros are like, there's nothing we can do about it, so everybody's just going to do it. And until the developers step in and make it so that you cannot snake. They kind of did it in Cold War, but it was still like you were able to do it a little bit, but it wasn't as bad. Like they made it so like I forget their exact wording, but it was basically like if you did like the crouch stand up like twice, after that, if you tried to do it a third time, it was super slow and
Hmm.
you weren't going to get that same animation. Um, until the developers do something to just completely eradicate the ability to do it. And obviously, it's really hard. I don't know anything about developing games, so I don't know how you could do it because literally, like, in my mind, the way you would do it is just remove being able to crouch and crone, which would be a major shift in Call of Duty. So you would have to balance trying to fix snaking with not removing those that movement or ability to go to crouch and prone. Um, until something happens on the developer side in game, it's just going to be something that is seen in game, especially now. Some of these maps, like Hotel in particular, that one control point in the restaurant, like you just see, I think the phrase I've seen thrown around is like tornado snaking or something. They literally are just snaking in a circle because there's 5 entrances in that point, and you're just snaking, looking at all 5 in a circle, going back and forth, back and forth. Um, until something happens on the developer side, it's going to be extremely hard to uh, adjust it because
Hmm.
we've seen in the past, even the pros have tried to GA it and police it themselves, and it's just impossible. And I think it was Tiny who was briefly a sub for the Minnesota Rocker in the first CDL season. I don't think he ever actually played or anything, but he's an S&D kid. Um, I forgot the actual clip. It might have been with Prolude actually, but like there was a CMG match or wager he was playing, and they got forfeited in a round because um, the player he was playing with, I believe it was Prolude, but I'm not going to say it just in case I'm wrong. Um, got accused of snaking, and it's actually banned on CMG. And it was like one of those things where he was behind the bomb and he proned behind the bomb to try to plant it, and then he went back up and he went down to reload and he popped back up. And it's one of those things where it's a gray area where it definitely, after watching the clip, I could see how it was construed as snaking, but it's kind of like, what do you want him to do? You want him to just stand behind the bomb,
Yeah.
reload, and get shot? So that's the thing with me. Like there are so many instances in COD where a player runs out of ammo, just goes prone behind something to reload, and then pops back up really quick. Is that sneaking? In my eyes, no. But based on the circumstances in game, other people could think that's snaking because they aren't there in the previous engagements to
Yeah.
see what led to that player having to go through laying down and reloading all that. So I kind of went on a tangent there, but I could even talk about it more. I'm super passionate about it. I just think it is unfortunate that it is something we're going to have to deal with. But like I said, until developers step in and just find a way to reasonably fix it, because again, I think getting rid of going prone and getting rid of crouch is probably the easiest way to do it, but that just completely changes the game. So I don't have the answer of how we get rid of snaking on the developer side or in the game, but until that actually happens, it's going to be really hard to police it, and we're probably just going to see the pros continuing to do it because, like you said, you can do it 2 phase up.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. There's just well, I said it in our group chat, but if you're in a 1v1 in, game 5 round 11 of a
Oh yeah,
major champs, and the difference between winning and losing is you snaking, almost all of these players are going to snake. And then they'll just be like, "Yeah, I did it. Like, I'm sorry," or whatever. But like, I'm still cashing the check. I'm not giving
yep,
it back. And it's you can't expect the players that have been accustomed to abusing mechanics throughout their entire careers. Like Shotzi is a very good example of someone who has found ways to manipulate the game to just be like one of the craziest players, like at least in terms of movement. And Selim in a lot of the same ways has been, like he was whatever 16 years old or whatever when he in IW, and he's getting banned from eights because he's so good that they can't even deal with it. Like the pros can't even deal with it. Like these players kind of figure out how the game works and what they can do to get advantages, even if they're just very slight or very temporary advantages. So it's ridiculous to even ask the players like, don't do this in the moment. It's a little bit different, like not to use an OP gun because
yep.
like you actually have to make a loadout. Snaking is a split second decision. Call of Duty happens very fast, and if you do it, and maybe you instinctively do it, it's not even like, oh, I'm going to snake. It's like, holy crap, like up down, or and then you're just like, oh, I snaked, and then you kill the guy, and they're pissed on Twitter. But I think at the end of the day, it's all on the developers. If the developers can't figure it out, then you ask the players like try not to do it, but you understand that it probably will be done anyway, and it's still on the developers. Like they have to figure out a way to combat snaking in some way. I know in CS:GO, like you can't crouch like several times in a row, like it gets really slow, and if maybe you just put a cooldown on crouching, you put a cooldown on prone, like that's really the only way that I think you could do it and still maintain like all of the same features and whatnot. But I mean, let's just be honest, we're probably not going to get that because it's only been a problem for like years and years. So yeah, I don't think anyone should get their hopes up, but that would probably be the best solution if if anything were to happen. But I think we both know that nothing will happen, which is unfortunate. But we're not surprised at all. Um, yeah, so let's talk about these next week of matches. Before we do that, pick'em records. So you are 46-36 after a 7-3 week one. I am 43-39. So 3 games back after a 6-4 week one. So a little bit of room to make up for me, but we both had a relatively good week. I will blame Seattle and London for not making up any ground. So Major 3 Week 2 qualifiers. We get another 10 matches. Friday, February 24th, we start off the week, Atlanta versus London. I'm going to go with Atlanta, but I'm expecting London to win now. I'm assuming you're going to go with Atlanta as well.
I most definitely am.
Toronto versus Optic. I think I have to go with Optic. I'm just very unsure about this Ultra roster. What about you?
Yep, I'm going with Optic too, but I think this could be a good one. Still, technically, we've seen one match of both of these teams with their latest rosters, so a little bit of a honeymoon phase potentially for both squads, and both squads were in the top half of the standings before these roster changes too. So, expecting this to be a good one either way, but I'll go with Optic.
Final match of Friday, LAG versus Boston. I think this is gonna be a pretty interesting matchup. I don't think either of these teams are very strong, and I think I have to go with Boston. I really don't have any confidence in either team though.
Yep, I'm going with Boston too. They are 2-0, so
Yeah, but yeah, I'm not feeling that pick really at all. Saturday, February 25th, starting with New York versus Toronto. Definitely not picking against New York at this point in time.
yeah, I'm going with New York too. This is when we were talking about Florida for some reason I mixed it up with Toronto, but I knew so Toronto plays Optic in New York back-to-back days. It's a pretty tough schedule,
Yeah.
but I'll take New York here.
Seattle versus LAT. Who knows? This is like just flip a coin. I'll go with the Thieves because like I can't pick Seattle like with a good conscience. I cannot pick them at their point in time. They are just too unpredictable, too wild for me. Who are you going with?
Yeah, I can't take Seattle here, so I'll go with LAT.
Florida versus Boston. I'll go with Boston. Definitely not feeling
Yeah,
Florida.
I'm going Boston too. That means 4-0 potentially for Boston, which would be pretty wild considering circumstances.
Atlanta versus Vegas. I so want Vegas to win just for the memes, but I'm going with FaZe.
A lot of chalk here. I got to go with FaZe too. But FaZe plays London and Vegas. Maybe they come in a little lackluster, or just
Mhm.
thinking easy matches on paper, and somebody catches them by surprise. But gotta expect FaZe to win this one.
The only thing with that match is Vegas is also a very good search and destroy team. I mean, Atlanta's the best search and destroy team at the moment, but if there's a team that could steal the second map, they just have to really force it to a game 5, which is a lot easier said than done for Vegas at this point. Sunday, February 26th, LAG versus London starting it off. I'm gonna go with LAG, but I I'm not gonna watch that match. I'm gonna have to ignore the stream at that point.
I'm going with LAG too.
Minnesota versus Optic. I'm gonna go with Minnesota. I don't.
Ooh.
I I like Minnesota, so I just need to pick them at least once.
All right, that's our first different one. I'm going with Optic.
And Florida versus Seattle. Oh my
Do it.
god.
Do
No,
it.
I'm definitely not picking Florida, so it's gonna be Seattle. I can't do it. Like, I mean, I don't want to pick Seattle, but I'd much rather pick Seattle than
It
pick the
was when
Mutineers.
you were saying earlier that he didn't want to pick Seattle for a match, and I saw this one. I was like, "Oh my god, this is gonna be so funny." I was hoping you would do it, but yeah, I'm going with Seattle too.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. A lot of chalk this week, but also, I mean, kind of that chalk is just some bad teams playing other bad teams or mediocre teams playing other mediocre teams. It's going to be a pretty obviously interesting week because we'll be going into our final week next weekend, going into like the qualifiers and whatnot, and it could have some pretty big seeding implications, especially if Seattle somehow goes like 2-0 this week. Then like I have no idea what I'm supposed to believe heading into the final weekend of qualifiers. So that about does it for the show. Make sure to subscribe, like, or follow the feed wherever you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at PresBuyers, and at Chall Podcast. I told Bink earlier that I'm going to really try to be more active on the podcast Twitter, post more clips and stuff, interact with anybody that's listening or wants to tweet at us. So at Chall Podcast on Twitter. Next show will be one of the last days of the month, either February 27th, 28th, which means that the podcast will probably be going up like the 28th or the 1st of March, which is crazy that we're already going to get into March. But next week we'll be, covering the matches from this upcoming week, talking about any major things that are happening, kind of going through the matches like we do. And then we're also going to give our picks for the third and final week of qualifying matches before we get to Major 3. But yeah, that about does it. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, nothing much from me. Thank you guys as always from tuning in. Should be interesting matches this weekend, and hopefully you guys tune in, and we have some good juicy bits to talk about next week. But until then, thanks again, and remember to send the chow.